In example 1, we're working in degrees, and we want to evaluate the cosine of negative 390 degrees. So we're going to start by finding an equivalent trig expression in terms of the coterminal angle between 0 and 360. So negative 390 is more than one lap in the clockwise direction around the circle. So we're going to add 2 revolutions by adding 2 times 360. And that's equal to 330 degrees. Okay, so that means that the cosine of negative 390 is equivalent to the cosine of 330 degrees. And 330 degrees is in quadrant 4 on the circle, right here. Okay, so now if I look for the reference angle for 330 degrees, my closest x-axis is at 360. So I would take 360 minus 330 to find the reference angle, which is 30 degrees. And if you recall, all students take calculus, cosine is positive in quadrant 4, which is where the terminal side of our angle lies. So our answer is going to be equivalent to the positive cosine of 30 degrees. So then to find the exact value, we're going to look at that first quadrant unit circle. And remember your first quadrant hand trick. Bend down your 30 degrees finger, which is your pointer finger. You have 3 fingers on top. That's the cosine. To remind you that that's square root of 3 over 2. The 1 finger on the bottom of the bent finger, that's to remind you the sine, which is 1 finger, so 1/2. But we want the cosine, and that's the 3 fingers on top. So the cosine of 30 degrees is square root of 3 over 2. Okay, now we can check that in the calculator if we put our calculator into degree mode. So we're going to hit mode, arrow down, and switch from radians to degrees. And then we're going to evaluate the cosine of negative 390. And we can compare that to the cosine of 30. Notice we get the same decimal. And we can compare that to a decimal approximation of the square root of 3 over 2. Notice we get the same thing each time. So the approximation rounded to 4 decimal places of accuracy for the cosine of negative 390 is 0.660. Okay, now we want to evaluate the cosecant of 600 degrees, and 600 is more than 1 revolution in the counterclockwise direction around the circle. So we're going to go ahead and subtract 1 revolution, and we're at 240 degrees. So the cosecant of 600 is equivalent to the cosecant of its coterminal angle, 240 degrees. Okay, 240 is between 180 and 270, so that puts the angle's terminal side in quadrant 3. and the cosecant is negative in quadrant 3. So we're just going to jot down a reminder here that we are negative in quadrant 3. And that's important to know because we're going to rewrite cosecant of 240 in terms of the sine or cosine of its reference angle. So the reference angle for 240 degrees is with respect to 180. So we're going to take 240 minus 180 to get a 60-degree reference angle. And remember, the reference angle is always the first quadrant angle whose coordinate we reference when we're looking for sine or cosine. So we can represent the cosecant, since it's the reciprocal of sine and it's negative in quadrant 3, as -1 divided by the sine of 60 degrees. So using our first quadrant hand trick, 60 degrees is our ring finger, so we bend that. The cosine is the 1 up above, which is 1/2. The sine is the 3 fingers underneath, which is 3, to remind us that the sine is square root of 3 over 2. So we would have negative, and then reciprocal of square root of 3 over 2 would be 2 over the square root of 3. And then we need to rationalize that denominator. So we're going to multiply by square root of 3 divided by the square root of 3, which is -2 square root of 3 over 3. And again, we can check that in the calculator in degree mode. So we want to make sure we're still in degrees. And we're going to evaluate cosecant. Notice there's no cosecant button on the graphing calculator. So we need that reciprocal identity that cosecant is 1 divided by the sine. So we're going to do 1 divided by the sine of 600 degrees. And we'll compare that to our equivalent expression for the reference angle, so -1 divided by the sine of 60 degrees. And notice we get the same thing. And we'll compare that to our final answer, -2 square root of 3 divided by 3. And we get the same thing each time. So rounding that answer to 4 decimal places of accuracy would be -1.1547. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and try the cotangent of -450 degrees on your own. And then when you're ready to resume, come back and we'll go over these answers together. Hey, welcome back. So you were going to try this one on your own, the the cotangent of -450 degrees. So if we add 2 laps around the circle, that's +2 times 360 to find a positive coterminal angle of 270. So the cotangent of -450 is equivalent to the cotangent of 270. And when we look at that, it's a quadrantal angle along the negative y-axis. Then in terms of our sines and cosines of the reference angle is always in the first quadrant, 0 to 90 degrees. So the reference for 270 would be 90. And the cotangent is the cosine over the sine. So we've got cosine of 90 over sine of 90. And remember, 270 has a negative y value, and so that makes the cotangent value negative. Okay, then to find the exact value of that trig expression, we need the coordinate at 270 or at 90, and that's 0, 1, and the 0 is the x and the 1 is the y. So when we divide -0 by 1, we get 0. So the cotangent of -450 degrees is equal to 0. Okay, now when we go to evaluate that in the calculator, making sure that we're in degree mode, there's no button here for cotangent, but we remember that cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, but it's also this quotient identity of cosine over sine. So let's enter it both ways and see what happens. So if we enter this as 1 divided by the tangent of -450, we get an error, a domain error. But if we enter it as the cosine of -450 divided by the sine, because we're using the quotient identity, of -450, then we get the 0 that we know is the right answer. So let's think about why the calculator would give us two different results if tangent is the reciprocal of, cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, but it's also the quotient cosine divided by sine. We think we should get the same answer. So what happens when you do 1 divided by the tangent of -450 is the calculator is processing this function, tangent of -450, before it divides 1 by that result. And the tangent of -450 is sine over cosine, which would be undefined. So that's why this is coming back as undefined, even though the correct answer is 0. So what you have to do is be really careful that when you're evaluating cotangent in your calculator, that you're always using the quotient identity, cosine over sine, rather than 1 over tangent, because if it's a quadrantal angle, you could get the wrong answer doing it the other way. Okay, so the answer is 0, right, not the error. And you need to remember to enter cotangents of quadrantal angles as cosine over sine, because 1 over tangent can't be done by your calculator.